tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, friends. So yesterday we were talking about the first 5 steps of the Noble Eightfold Path, and understanding that the right understanding is that first step of undertaking anything. One should understand what one is doing, and basically it's one's view of the world. But based on one's right view, one's idea of what the world is, what life is, or the purpose of life, what the mind is, then one, depending on that right view, then that's the way you're going to think. And the way you think is the way you're going to speak and act, and then even live your life. Now we come to the right effort, and basically the right effort means the effort to do all the above. The effort to practice cultivating right view, which means also getting if you're really serious about the teachings of the Buddha, to get a good knowledge of that, and then we use that to reflect upon, and then when you meditate, it's easier for the mind to kind of gravitate to that type of mindfulness. But the right effort has four parts to it also. It's called the effort to prevent unwholesome states from coming into your mind, although that's very difficult to do, but so the effort to prevent the negative states of mind from coming into you, but when they do come in, the effort to push them out. Now you can't really prevent them from coming until you've already attained the 2nd and 3rd stages of enlightenment. But the preventing also means avoiding the type of places that pull your buttons, or that test your temptations, that you may not be strong enough yet to resist. So we get lured or tempted to indulge in some unskillful behavior that we were trying to overcome. So to prevent means don't visit those places. If you have trouble with alcohol, don't go to bars. If you have trouble with, I won't mention certain vices, but don't go there, right? If you have trouble with food, don't walk down the street with all the pastry shops on it. So you kind of avoid going to those places where the mind would just be kind of tempted. Later on, when you've developed yourself quite a bit, then it wouldn't matter too much whether you go to those places or not. But the effort to drive out unwholesome states when they come, that's probably the more active part, especially in meditation, but also out of meditation, in one's daily life. But we like to entertain our negative thoughts, right? It's so nice to kind of plot revenge with somebody who wronged us, or fantasize all kind of stuff. What would happen to so and so, if they weren't around or whatever. And not only that, you also sensual fantasies. Allow our mind to just indulge in fantasies and so on that we know will never ever take place, but we get some kicks, so to speak, out of entertaining those things. And if you entertain them enough, then at some point they could lead you to doing again some behaviors that you try to overcome. So, and then the third and fourth right efforts is the effort to cultivate wholesome states that you don't yet have. So the wholesome states, like to practice generosity. If you're a miserly type, it's like practicing generosity. You're sharing some stuff with others, or helping others too, and being generous with one's time and helping others if occasion arises, and of course cultivating the right speech and practicing sila, and cultivating, but the meditation practice, developing the habit to get up early enough in the morning to get in a decent period of meditation, or to do some yoga and meditation in the morning, even if it means getting up 30 minutes earlier or 45 minutes earlier. The benefit that's going to give you, getting up earlier in the morning, that extra, let's say an hour, is going to do you more benefit than an hour of sleep in most cases. Or you train yourself, challenge yourself to go to sleep earlier. Because nothing comes from nothing. And if you want to cultivate Dhamma practice, then you have to apply this kind of efforts, and you have to sort out one's priorities, and learning how to renounce. Like, if you like to stay up 2 hours and 11 or 12 o'clock at night, just poring over a bunch of internet stuff, or indulging in internet tic-tac-toe and all this kind of stuff people waste hours on, you got to discipline yourself. My brother plays solitaire on the computer. Stays up till 11:30 at night. But so it's the effort to cultivate those wholesome qualities, because they help to counter the unskillful ones. And then the last two steps of the Eightfold Path, as we've already mentioned, are right mindfulness and right concentration. And we've already been talking about that in a general way. But the right mindfulness usually means contemplation according to the four foundations of mindfulness. It means being mindful of the body, mindful of feelings, mindfulness of the mind states, and mindfulness of Dhamma. So basically, it's the four foundations of mindfulness that you can read in several texts and books. And there's a lot more to it than how it's often taught just in certain places. There's a lot more to that. There's those instructions in mindfulness, which includes an investigation of the Dhamma. And after all the different sections of the Mindfulness Sutta, like after the mindfulness of the body, it says, the meditator understands how this body arises, how does it continue, and how does it eventually cease. He understands how these feelings arise, how do they continue by our feeding them, and how do they cease. And the same with mind states. How do these mind states arise? how do they continue, and how do they eventually cease. And the same with the contemplation of Dhamma, which is a deeper, a wider, more broader topic, but includes the 7 factors of enlightenment. And it includes a realization of the Four Noble Truths. And all of that comes before right concentration. According to the list of the Eightfold Path. But of course, all these different steps of the Eightfold Path don't necessarily one follow the other. They're all become integrated, as I'm going to mention shortly. And then the right concentration, as some of you already have mentioned, means trying to develop those levels of reaching the third, fourth, or first, second, third, and fourth jhana. But as I've already mentioned, through practicing the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and practicing the 7 factors of enlightenment, you attain jhana at the end of those 7 factors of enlightenment is the stage of concentration, which means those levels of jhana. So you can reach them having practiced mindfulness, cultivated wisdom, suppressed the hindrances, and then you enter those jhanas, and after that, at any moment, the mind could open and one could realize, like entering the stream or the stages of wisdom, the meditation of wisdom. So, so those 8 stages, they're steps of the Noble Eightfold Path. As I mentioned, they're not necessarily practiced one after the other, but there is a logical sequence in that. They all help to strengthen each other. It's like a bicycle wheel, okay? So the Eightfold Path is normally depicted as a wheel, an 8-spoked wheel, which is called the Dhamma Chakra, or the wheel of Dhamma, setting the wheel of Dhamma in motion, which the Buddha's first noble truth, or the Buddha's first sermon was about. But it's shaped like an 8-spoked wheel. So if you have a bicycle wheel and some of the spokes are broken or loose, and you get on the bike to ride it, then what will happen? Yeah, it'll be not a very even, smooth ride. You may get somewhere a little bit, but it's going to be rough to steer and so on, and eventually the bike may just collapse. So all of the spokes have to be tightened evenly and equally and evenly to get the smoothest ride. So the same way with the Noble Eightfold Path, that all those spokes have to be exercised. And a lot of people have trouble remembering 8 things of the Eightfold Path. And that's why normally the 8 steps are subdivided into 3 umbrella groups called Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or skillful conduct, mental composure, and wisdom, or to use often other words, morality, concentration, and wisdom. But skillful behavior is a translation for morality, I think, is a more accurate type of description. Or it's behavior in conformity with truth. It's behavior in conformity with the laws of nature. And the laws of nature is the law of karma. So it's, behavior in conformity with the laws of nature that, certain actions bring suffering. and other actions bring non-suffering. So the first two steps of the Eightfold Path actually belong to the wisdom group. So right understanding and right thought actually belong to the panya, or the wisdom group. Even though it's mentioned last, in reality it's practiced first. Because without getting some kind of intellectual understanding, no one is going to practice. None of you would have come to a meditation course or come to the Bhavana Society if you hadn't somewhere at some point picked up a book or heard a lecture, a tape, or a YouTube talk by, somebody about the Dhamma. Am I wrong? How many people here first heard Buddhism through reading a book or hearing something on the internet? Probably 99%. So, so as I mentioned yesterday, that at least that initial intellectual understanding, pricks your interest, and then you can go on thinking about it. Then finally you realize, I guess I better start practicing right speech. I guess after getting caught for telling some lies, or people blaming you for telling their secrets or something, or whatever. So then you start practicing the sila. And then you get an interest to meditate. And you start to meditate. And then you realize all the hindrances that are blocking your meditation. What are they? Guilt, worry, remorse, fear, attachments, aversions, getting lost in your sensual thoughts or just other thoughts, doubts, confusion. It's like a solid wall thrown up in front of you. So you realize, I guess I better tighten up my sila a little more. So you practice the right speech a little more. You practice the right action a little more. And then as you stop doing those unskillful behaviors, then you realize that little by little, when you meditate, there's less guilt, worry, remorse, and fear coming up, or less neurotic thoughts and that are connected with those sensuality or aversion and so on. So you say, that's hopeful. And so you try to practice the sila even more. And so you're practicing right speech and right action. And then maybe you wind up having a job which causes you to sort of either directly or indirectly do some of those wrong livelihood occupations, like getting caught up in deceptive schemes that defraud or deceive people in one way or another, or telling lies about various things. Anyway, so many things. So and if you're able to, then maybe change one's profession to find something that doesn't cause you this kind of conflicts of interest. So, and then each time, as you're doing those things and you meditate, you see that your mind is getting more calm because of these distracting influences are getting less and less, and so your meditation improves. And as your meditation improves, you see that the wisdom gets deeper. It goes from intellectual wisdom to a deeper level of reflective wisdom. And that goes on and on and on. And then gradually you start getting deeper insights. Because that, as your wisdom increases, you see the loopholes in your sila. And so you patch those loopholes. You tighten up those loopholes in the sila. The mind giving into his excuses why it should, take a little glass of beer or a glass of wine, or whatever it is, go have a private affair or something. So you tighten up your sila, And as you go meditate, then you realize, you're able to get deeper concentration because of less of those types of worries or conflicts. And as the wisdom deepens, or then you see how to tighten up the sila more. And then the meditation deepens, and the wisdom deepens more. And you keep on discovering more subtle loopholes, or even taking on extra sila. Like maybe if you're a layman, but you decide, well, maybe I'll follow the monk's rule of not eating after noon. Cut down on that kind of attachment. Or some other time, I'll stop going to the movies, or stop going to entertainments, because you see that also has subtle influences on the mind, right? So there's lots of ways that you can keep tightening up the sila and simplifying the life, because you see it's helping to in turn deepen those other levels of your concentration and wisdom, and then the happiness, the inward happiness and peace that comes with sustained practice. So that's how all those things really help each other. Now those three categories of sila, samadhi, and panya, they're given in an analogy of building a house. So if you want to build a house, especially in a northern climate where the ground freezes in the winter, you have to dig a trench, and you have to fill it with rocks or concrete, and then put on normally a concrete slab. Then you have a good foundation. Because if you build a house on a loose foundation, then when a flood comes, it may wash the house away, or wash whatever loose, flimsy foundation you might have had. So the sila is considered to be like building the foundation of the house to withstand the floods. So what are the floods? Guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. Some other things, but those are certainly the big ones, coming for when you broke a sila or something. You told a lie, and oh my gosh, somebody's going to find out, and wife's looking over your shoulder. And, so that washes away whatever concentration you might have had. If you give in and break a sila here and there, then it's going to affect and weaken whatever concentration you might have had. So that's why a sila is considered the foundation. So once you got a good foundation, what's next? You're building a house. Okay, you have to build up the four walls. So now, like this meditation hall, it has a good foundation. I'm one of the ones who designed it and put it in. I know, it's got a very, very solid foundation underneath it. And then we build up these walls. And you have to use good construction techniques. And you have to, interlock the corners, whether you're using brick or wood, and then the rafters. These rafters that go out like that, they keep the walls rigid so that they withstand strong winds. Because if a strong wind, like a hurricane or tornado comes by, it'll just, like toothpicks, just blow a house. And we see that on the pictures and all these tornadoes in the Midwest, that are built out of wood, or there's other places, they just get blown apart because probably they were using shoddy materials or just, not the proper techniques. So the concentration is like building the frame of the house. On top of the foundation, you build the frame of the house. And that's the concentration, which includes mindfulness also. Mindfulness and concentration, and right effort, that group of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or Samadhi includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And what are the winds? We mentioned the floods being, guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. And the winds are the 8 worldly winds, or the 8 worldly Dhammas. That means gain and loss, pleasure and pain, praise and blame, and fame and defame. And so people's lives revolve around this, When you have a pleasure, then the mind gets giddy and very nice, but when it gets a lot of pain, then it goes down in the dumps. And the same with gain and loss. When you have a lot of money and a lot of gain, and the stock market crashes and you lose everything, then people commit suicide. The same with praise or blame. People praise you and you get elated, and then something happens and they blame you. So these are called the winds because they blow people's lives around. They blow their mind around. It's not stable. So the concentration helps to withstand those winds because through the concentration, you're not easily affected by the impermanence. So basically, it's the impermanence that shakes the mind. So when you're developed in mindfulness and concentration, then the mind is not easily shaken, like shaken by a strong itch that arises, or shaken by a fly that's crawling on your face, or a spider that's crawling on your head, and so on. You don't get so excited. So, and then wisdom. Okay, now we got the foundation. We got the frame of the house. What's last? The roof. I didn't mention the roof. The frame of the house and the rafters. Right? So, you can't really live in a house without a roof. If you don't have a roof, and then the Canadian geese flying, south in the summer and drop some white stuff splat on your head, or other things. So the wisdom is like the crowning glory of the roof. It keeps out the elements, so we can live in that house all 4 seasons. Live in it comfortably. And have our thermostat set so the temperature is always even. That's like having mindfulness, being grounded in the present moment. And the middle path, not going to extremes. Keeping that thermostat set in the middle. Not too hot, not too cold. And so that's how we can, live in this body-mind house comfortably. With the Eightfold Path allows us to build that type of spiritual house, you could say. Now, coming back to the 8 individual factors, there's 3 of those 8 factors that are called the 3 pillars. Bhante Ji calls them the 3 pillars of the Eightfold Path. The 3 most important steps of the Eightfold Path. And what do you think the first one would be? What? Right understanding. Because without right understanding, you can't do anything. And then the next 2 could be interchanged. They're both equally important, but the next 2, anybody have an idea what the next one would be? Mindfulness. And the third one? Effort. Right understanding, right mindfulness, and right effort. And I'll explain why. Because mindfulness, right understanding understands what is right according to Dhamma, according to Sila, and it understands what is wrong, again, according to Dhamma, according to Sila. So, keeping the precepts is right, breaking all the precepts would be wrong. And any other types of unskillful, negative behaviors that bring suffering would be considered wrong actions. I know people don't like to use those terms, right or wrong, but just for the sake of argument. Okay. So, when a wrong action, when a wrong thought enters your mind, let's go back a second. So, right understanding, it knows what is right thought and it knows what is wrong thought. It knows what is right speech, it knows what is wrong speech. It knows what is right action, it knows what is wrong action. It knows what is right effort, it knows what is wrong effort. It knows what is right mindfulness, it knows what is wrong mindfulness. And it knows what is right concentration, and it knows what is wrong concentration. So, according to that, if a wrong thought enters your mind, like the thought to tell a lie, for example, you're entertaining some thought, maybe to tell a lie on your income tax or records to, get something, or any other thing. Right understanding would say, that's wrong. So mindfully you observe, this thought is entering the mind. And right understanding, observe, this is a wrong thought. And right effort drives that wrong thought out of the mind and replaces it with right thought. And so the same way with when the intention for a speech arises, the mindfulness detects that urge to speak, and the understanding says this is going to be wrong speech. And then right effort is the effort to not say the wrong speech, but instead say the right speech. And so the same thing plays out with all the other steps. So that's why those three are the most important. And are called the three pillars of the Eightfold Path. So right understanding, right mindfulness, and right effort. In that way we can... because a lot of people, they say, they don't even know what is right speech. Like you can see all the speech that goes on in the media and everything else, and it's mostly wrong speech, according to Dhamma anyway, frivolous talk, and so many other, and also actions too. All these television shows, not all of them, a lot of them, soap operas and all this kind of stuff. My mother used to watch soap operas. So now, where's that question box? Anyway, I wanted to also finish the talk about the right mindfulness and right concentration, because there was a question about that last night that I didn't fully answer. And the practice of concentration, if you practice concentration just with the idea to quieten the mind and to reach some state of inner quietness and maybe see some inner light, and or just to experience these nice pleasant blissful feelings that arise, and you practice it mainly just for that purpose. And as I mentioned, by doing that, by the sheer power of the concentration, it kind of pushes the thoughts down. It pushes the 5 hindrances down. And then temporarily the mind becomes peaceful. But when you come out of that concentration, then as I mentioned, gave that example about the good meditations and bad meditations. If you have good meditation, then next time maybe expect a bad one, because that pressures the top of the unconscious mind, and then it releases stuff from inside. So if you practice concentration just for that purpose of gaining some inner quiet and come out, it's like that. It's the simile of a jack-in-the-box. Okay? The head of a jack-in-the-box is a clown or a devil. In Germany they call it a devil, Kostenteufel. Anyway, so this clown's head represents the ego and all of its defilements of greed and hatred, but basically the ego. So you push the head down in the box, and then you put the lid on it, right? So the head is hidden. But what happens when you take the lid off? Boing! The head comes back up. Sometimes with a lot of power. Why is that? Why does it come up with a lot of power?
It was under pressure.
Yeah, the spring was compressed. And so, in a similar way, if we don't develop wisdom, if we just practice concentration by whatever methods, just to suppress the thoughts, that doesn't really get at the roots, and so they'll come back up again. You might feel quite nice and well for a few hours after coming out of that meditation, but when you start intermingling with people again, your buttons get pushed, and then the old defilements come back up again. So that concentration alone does not necessarily purify the roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. But in Vipassana meditation, we're not trying to suppress our thoughts. So we're not using a tiny little object to exclusively focus on. We want to maintain awareness. But we do develop initial concentration by, as I've been mentioning, using the movements here, which is not so tiny of it's more open. But it's still concentration. It's still a very limited area. So you're using that, and you stay mindful enough to notice, you don't get sucked into that deep mental quietness, but you gain enough quietness and centeredness to be able to easily start noticing things going on around you. And then observe, enduring that pain, enduring itches, and applying whatever right understanding you have to undermine that attachment to them, and not reacting to them. So through that practice of the mindfulness, you learn how to become centered, but in the midst of things still going on around you. Still with sounds going on around and other body sensations. And even thoughts. You don't have to completely stop your thoughts either. But you train yourself not to get lost in them. So they may come up, last for a moment, but your mindfulness sees them, your right effort pushes them out, and leaves the mind back in the flow of moment-to-moment awareness. And then gradually, eventually, you see that, when that builds up to a high level, you gain the insights into impermanence, and especially of no self. When you come to that point where the ego starts to dissolve by not reacting to sense stimuli, the ego starts to dissolve, and that's the wisdom of anatta, no self, which seriously weakens the infrastructure of ego consciousness. It's like pulling, if you have a four-corner building and you pull one corner out of it, it may not totally fall down, but it's going to seriously weaken that infrastructure. So that's what happens with the insights, especially the insight into no self, the insight into all three, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. And something else that's very interesting. You see, there's three aspects of our mental experience. There's the knower, which is the I, the person, and then the known, which is the object of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. Those are the objects, and the knower here. So the knower is on one side, the object is on the other side. See, the knower is here, and the object is, the sounds or sights coming in, the smells, tastes. What's in the middle? Knowing. Knowing is in the middle. Knowing is the missing link. So we have the knower, the known, and knowing. Knowing means awareness. But we hardly know anything about awareness. Real awareness, not consciousness. Awareness. That's in the middle. But the mind, what happens when the senses are impinged, the ego jumps over, is in such a frantic rush to gobble the object, it jumps over that and gets the object. And so it bypasses awareness. But when you delay that jumping of the mind, then you get a little inkling about the space between the ego and the object, the knower and the known. And you start to get a little inkling about awareness, the buffer zone, right? And so in Vipassana meditation, there's two ways you can approach the breaking of the cycle. The easiest and most common one is you give up the attachment to the objects. Although only a very rare few people could immediately start observing the ego and let it go before they've actually let go of the objects. So usually we work on the objects first because that's the easiest ones to observe. So through the practice of mindfulness, we become aware of yes, hearing, just hearing vibration, seeing, smelling, not allowing the mind to immediately jump. You create that buffer zone. And the buffer zone is created through the concentration, to the connection to the breath, normally. Or the connection on just remembering sitting. Or maybe the sensations like your buttocks or feet or hands touching together. Any of those acts as a kind of a anchor to the present moment. So as you start to let go of the objects, then more of the knowing becomes evident. You start to experience the knowing. And when you're no longer going out to the objects, as I mentioned before, the ego has nothing to stand on because the ego lives in direct relationship to the objects that it's identified with and has the strongest attachments or aversion with. So once you reach that state of, like, the spider web, that awareness of the spider web, or at least a good state of awareness where the mind isn't going out so much. The mind might start to go out, but you check it with mindfulness and wisdom, and it comes back. And so the more it comes back and rests in the present, then the knowing becomes more evident. And then you turn, and this is that stage of the empty house. But inside the house, still it's not going to be totally empty yet, but that sense of I can still be there. Because this is what happens to a lot of people when they meditate. Because I know people have come to me in interviews and told me these things, and it had been my experience even also in my early years. But, they get to a state of concentration and everything becomes very quiet, and they're feeling these blissful feelings, and kind of, everything is really, really quiet. And all of a sudden they're gripped by a fear. Because it feels like they're being sucked down a black hole. And the mind gets afraid. Because everything they've thought familiar, because their thoughts have stopped in deep concentration, or mostly, and not thinking about past or future anymore. And so there's like everything that they were identified with is vanishing, and that's very scary. And their sense of ego was starting to vanish, and they panicked. Maybe not on an intellectual level, but from deep inside, from the ignorance. Maybe intellectually they would like to let it go, but it's a whole another kettle of fish. The ego, it's not intellectual. It's in the cells and atoms even of our body, or at least the cells. So that's why people, can't. It's difficult for them to go deeper in the meditation because of that ego. That sort of, it's the last frontier. It's the last barrier. All the objects can disappear, or people get that tranquility and they think, "Oh, I'm such a good meditator now." They open their eyes to look at somebody else snoring. "Oh yeah, I'm so good." So that ego is the last to go. So therefore you have to turn your wisdom onto the ego. And see that last trace of the I that's still there, and just understand it's just a bubble. It's the source of suffering. What is it anyway? And not even to pay attention to that. Pay attention to the awareness. Now you got the ego here and the knowing, right? The knowing has already disappeared. So you got the knowing, and you got still the subtle sense of I is there. And which is happier? Which is nicer? As you focus on the knowing, then the last traces of and you're no longer building up the known, the last traces of the self can vanish. And that's basically what the process of the vipassana is. And because of the wisdom that has undermined the tight clinging and delusions to holding on to all of the five aggregates. So that is the kind of wisdom that's cultivated in there, that destroys that spring of the jack-in-the-box. When you get those deep insights, and so the first time you get a deep insight into no self, it's like you're going into the box with a pair of wire cutters, and you cut it 25%. You cut the spring through 25%. That's the first stage of enlightenment, entering the stream. It breaks the three fetters. I'm not going to go into explaining all of them, it takes too long. But you can read it in books. So, now the spring has been weakened 25%. So when you push the head back in the box again, or when the head comes out again, it comes up with only 75% of its previous power. Then you go on meditating again, over and over, and at some point you get another deep, powerful insight. And it's like cutting through the spring another 25% away. So when the head comes up again, it only comes up with 50% power. And you go on meditating again, and at some point you get another powerful insight, and like cutting another 25% through. And then the next time the head comes out, it only comes up with 25% of its previous power. Quite weak. I mean, the ego. There's still a tiny little trace even in the mind of never return. It's called mana, or conceit. But it's very weak. And then finally, when one reaches the full enlightenment, it's like the last part of the spring being cut through. And when you take the lid off, nothing comes out. That means greed, hatred, and delusion. So that is just an analogy of sort of the difference between the effects of the vipassana meditation as the effects of just attaining concentration, but without wisdom. But the concentration is necessary. But the problem is a lot of people get stuck in the bliss or other even psychic powers and so on that may come out of attaining these states, and they get sidetracked and don't go on to develop wisdom. So that's why the wisdom aspect is emphasized so much. And actually, the Eightfold Path, the way it's explained, it doesn't talk about liberation. The path is leading up to the edge of the well. Following all those steps, right understanding, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Then there's actually a tenfold path. Bhante has mentioned this, which is called right knowledge and right liberation. So, reaching the right mindfulness and right concentration isn't necessarily a guarantee for enlightenment, because so many factors have to be coming together. But it's attaining those stages of magga and phala, which is each of those 4 stages, insights I mentioned, is a right knowledge. And each one has its own level of liberation. Liberation from the 3 fetters, liberation from the next 2 fetters, the liberation from the rest of the fetters. So that right knowledge and right liberation is actually the end of the practice. So even the Noble Eightfold Path itself only leads up to the brink, and you have to make that jump into the unknown. That means the ego. You have to cut that cord of the ego if you want to really attain freedom. So anyway, I just mentioned those things to try to round out that understanding, and just to show how both the mindfulness and concentration do have to be developed, and they have to be balanced, but one has to also understand the process that's involved, and also to understand the pitfalls or the stumbling blocks that can occur if people hear about jhanas and they go, "Oh yeah, I want to attain a jhana," and so whatever they've heard about it, or bliss or getting powers from them or whatever. But again, it's not easy to reach those levels. And again, mindfulness comes first, because again, in all those lists, the Buddha recommends develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness first. And the reason is because you attain those jhanas easily after having developed the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Okay? So I think that may be enough to kind of finish up, but if you have any final questions, you can write them down for this evening. And as I mentioned, tomorrow's closing talk, I'm going to talk about some practical issues about practicing, keeping up the practice of mindfulness, meditation, Dhamma practice in the daily life.